All right. Welcome, everyone, to another Scoop Cyber podcast hosted at the wonderful Carasoft Podcast Studio. Today, we're going to be talking about discovering hidden IoT Trojan horses in critical infrastructure. A growing cybersecurity challenge for everyone is how do we secure physical systems, our cities, our facilities, and utilities that we depend on every day, from elevators to water pumps to access control systems, smart lighting. There's a number of connected devices in our physical environments, and it has exploded in terms of the quantity. But many of those systems never were designed with cybersecurity in mind. They've become what we call hidden Trojan horses, potential entry points for attackers and operational networks. I'm Mike Smola, head of strategy at Scoop Cyber, and today we will host a discussion with our expert panelists from Nelisys, an AI-based facility and building gatekeeper, and CI Discern, a diverse team of exceptional professionals committed to share the mission of improving critical infrastructure security and resiliency. We'll discuss what makes these environments unique and why traditional IT tools like firewalls, endpoint protection just don't cut it, and how Nelisys and CI Discern are helping organizations gain full visibility, control, and resilience across their connected assets. So Randy, Greg, I'll let you introduce yourself. Randy, we'll start with you.
Wow, thanks so much, Mike. And what a great day here in the DMV on a Friday afternoon to be doing a podcast. Thank you so much to CyberScoop and Carasoft. And glad to have you with me here, Greg. A little bit about me. I'm a 25-year cybersecurity veteran. I've worked at a number of notable companies like Tripwire and Tenable, recently at Dragos and Nozomi Networks, all revolving around the go-to-market for new innovative cybersecurity solutions. And my role today here with Nelisys is to lead the charge in the go-to-market strategy here in North America.
Great. Yeah, it's good to be here. Appreciate it. And I'm Greg Sisson. I had about 40 years experience in the public sector with a career in the Army. Retired from the Army and stayed in Department of Defense and as a federal civilian. Worked under U.S. Cyber Command to help stand up their defensive organization, the Joint Force Headquarters, Doden. Then I finished out my civilian career at the Department of Energy, where I was the Chief Information Security Officer there. Then I went to my first industry job ever at Ernst & Young, where I met my now business partner. I was working in the cyber and energy practice there at Ernst & Young. And then in March of 2024, we launched CI Discern, which is a professional services and advisory firm focused on critical infrastructure security and resiliency, mainly in the energy and maritime and government sectors. And we're focused on providing solutions around CISO advisory, risk management, and cyber program transformation.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for joining us today. I think we're going to have kind of an honest discussion about what the challenges are in this particular environment. In my background, I know that this has always been a topic of conversation, but frankly, there hasn't been much done in it. I think for a variety of reasons. One, the tools weren't available to be able to do it effectively. There's a number of different groups that are responsible for securing aspects of this. And there's a lot of confusion on how to get this done. So again, thank you. So let's start with this. What's really happening inside of these modern facilities that makes IoT such an attractive target? And Randy, we'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. I think the best way to think about this particular marketplace is we all can relate to this. Think about your own home. And inside your own home, years ago, you got your first router, you've got wireless connections, and then fast forward to today, and we keep adding devices. And I guarantee you, anybody listening to this podcast is fully aware of the fact that they keep adding new things like intelligent TVs. You got your Ring devices, you've got heck, you might have Bluetooth on your toaster oven, those kind of things. You just keep adding and adding. On the side of your house, you probably have a smart meter today for your energy. And so that's just a good example so everybody can relate. But in the real world, in commercial real estate, data centers, those kind of areas, they are also adding intelligent IP-enabled devices, whether it's for biorecognition, whether it's for opening and shutting gates, whether it's for camera systems. The list just kind of goes on and on. And back to your question is, so who's responsible for that? Who is watching the back door for cybersecurity bad guys trying to get into those facilities? And the answer is it's not obvious, because you have the CISOs, you have the CIOs, they're very busy on other aspects, and you have the facilities folks who are not really usually cyber proficient as we know them. And so it's not clear who actually owns this, and that is part of the fundamental problem here. I would tell you that the metrics and the data says that these buildings are being hacked pretty continuously, and that growth, that attack vector is growing 18% year over year, according to IBM, and over half of the commercial real estate buildings in this country have already been hacked in the last year.
Yeah, and I have to think that you're probably exactly right with that, but they don't even know it. I mean, there's probably a visibility standpoint that they just, one, they don't have good visibility into it, and again, who's in charge of it? And Greg, I really want to get your thoughts on this, because as you talk to people in this industry, in the commercial and public sector, what are they telling you in terms of who's in charge of it? What are they doing in terms to gain visibility? What are they concerned about?
Yeah, that's good. I think that's why you saw it in the last several years. You saw a trend of more companies having CSOs, right? So you have a chief security officer that has oversight of both physical and cybersecurity, and because they started to see that, right? They saw that there is just this prevalence of IP-enabled stuff, IoT, that is throughout their building, a lot of it in the physical security space, a lot of it in the cybersecurity space. So what better person to try to gain visibility of all of that stuff and put controls in place to try to protect the organization from those IoT devices from becoming attack vectors into the organization. Some places it's been effective, and some places it's not, right? And a lot of that goes back to processes. Just because something can be IP enabled, just because it can be connected to a network doesn't mean it has to be. So what processes do you have for bringing, your logistics processes for bringing things into your organization in the warehouse, understanding what things are IP enabled and making a risk-based decision on, are they going to be IP enabled? And if they are, right, how are we going to have visibility of them, and how are we going to put controls in place to protect them and keep them from becoming attack vectors into our business environments or into other environments where they don't need to be. And so I think that's part of it, and they're slowly getting there. Some companies are better than others, but yeah, it's hard. It's sheer volume of IP enabled devices in the environment is just incredible.
Yeah, and I don't want to go down the AI rabbit hole yet, because I know that people are fascinated with what's going on with AI and how this may impact both from an attacker standpoint and from a protection standpoint. But I just have to think from an AI perspective, all the data centers that are getting built right now. I mean, the investment that's going into AI and the data centers to be able to do a variety of different things in technology and the data that it's holding. Randy, what are you hearing in that space as specifically it relates to data centers? I know we can talk about other things, but data centers I know is at the top of mind for a lot of organizations right now.
Yeah, it certainly is, and there's a tremendous growth as we sit here in Loudoun County, Virginia, one of the very big data center places in the U.S. There's several hundred data centers right down the road here. They should be, but they aren't necessarily thinking about that cyber physical system protection, and I would advocate for, particularly as the new ones come online, is kind of build security by design, not retrofit it later. There are certainly a ton of data centers out there that should be retrofitted, but it's much easier to do it up front. And so part of our role is to make sure that they see how easy it is to actually outfit these data centers with security by design up front for all the intelligent devices. And I think that's the right answer. In addition to that, there is a organization around building cybersecurity. It's a not-for-profit, and they are advocating a framework to do exactly this. And because the current frameworks that NIST and MITRE have don't really fit exactly what we're trying to do here. So there does need to be something that's very specific for IoT devices and in these particular use cases. So I think there's a lot to be gained for everybody by doing it this way. And those, as we know, AI and data centers are driving this country right now, and we ought to make sure that we're protecting those the best we can.
Yeah, and Greg, kind of continue to pull on that data center thread and the AI component. And if it sounds like there's very little standardization in terms of protecting what I would consider critical infrastructure for organizations, there's a lot of monitoring that's going into place, endpoint security and firewalls and different stuff like that. But when it comes to gaining physical access to these critical areas that house not only data, but computing power and operational power for organizations to sell goods and services, where is the prioritization? What are you hearing from industry in general along these lines?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one of the first things that comes to mind is the word consequences, right? I think that organizations really need to take a look at what is the greatest consequence, right? And what's gonna cause an impact on that, or what's gonna generate that consequence. And so if we're talking about data centers, what do they most rely on in order to be able to deliver, constant availability of the data center, right?
Uptime, right?
Cooling, right? Availability. Yeah. It's availability of that resource. And so cooling, of course, is going to be, an impact to their cooling is going to have a serious consequence. Impact to their power is going to have significant consequences for them to be able to deliver, right? And so that's one of the things that we work with organizations on is how do you even define what the greatest consequences are that are going to impact your operations, and then how do you put controls in place? How do you put engineering in place? How do you do it by design so that if those consequences actually happen and those high availability systems are impacted, how do you respond to it? How are you resilient to an attack, and then be able to bring it back online quickly?
Yeah, and I'm sure it's the prioritization of this, at least in those discussions, have changed a lot in the last 10 years, obviously. But I just wonder how ready these organizations are. Yeah, you shake your head. You're like you're not convinced that they are ready. And I think you're exactly right. At least in my experience and seeing where we are and where we are today and where we were, I'm not so sure or convinced that we've evolved in this area in terms. And I think a lot of that is what we're talking about today and how do we help solve that. And not only Nellis's tool, but then the consulting that your organization is doing in terms of trying to bring people awareness and bring them up to speed and to rethinking how they do that. Now we're going to pull on this AI thing, right?
Can I just make one point?
Yeah, sure.
I think you hit on something that I want to go back to real quick. About organizations being prepared. I think, you're seeing this in the electrical generation space as well as the data centers and other things. I think, companies are really going after market share, which is understandable, but they're doing it in a way because a lot of them aren't regulated, right? A lot of these are not generating enough power to reach a threshold to where they're being regulated by NERC-CIP or some other regulatory framework. And so they're just out there trying to grab market share. And then cybersecurity, physical security, security in general is an afterthought. And that's, so they've managed to, a lot of them have managed to escape and not have a significant incident, but I mean, it's only a matter of time. And so they really have to stop and
I think about my time in the cybersecurity space, and utilizing endpoints and firewalls and all those different things to try to detect security anomalies and to address them at that point, right? I mean, network related stuff, click on a link brings in badness, but I don't recall recently, and when I say recently, in the last 5 to 7 years, having a conversation about IoT devices and them being exploited to access what I would consider critical infrastructure to any organization, and to impact their way of doing business. But yet they all talk about uptime, right? I mean, if there's a fire or something like that, and you think about impacting sprinkler systems and fire suppression systems and all sorts of stuff, and what that continuous monitoring looks like, and if something were to happen even in those spaces. And so along with that, we're going to pull on this AI thing because it's a real big topic and people love talking about it. Randy, you want to get your thoughts on, and we can backtrack even if you want to on that, but what are you seeing and what are you hearing, and how, in terms of Nellis and their capabilities, are addressing this AI boom that's occurring right now?
Yeah, so I think and I will roll back what Greg said.
I figured you were. There's a lot to unpack there, right?
There is, and it's all about consequence. There is no question about it. I can tell you, in my time back in 2010, I was running around talking to all the big energy companies, and there was no consequence at that time. They knew the Chinese were in their networks. That was a fact. Everyone knew it was in the news, but they weren't willing to do anything about it. And the answer always was, nothing bad has ever happened. And that was true back then. Since that time, we've had Stuxnet, we've had Colonial Pipeline, we've had Ukraine 2014, Ukraine 2016. The list goes on and on and on, and it continues to grow. So then come 2018, 2019, 2020, a lot of the traditional OT vendors, two of which I work for, there was consequence, and they knew it. So they started outfitting themselves with intrusion detection devices and such. And so, and FERC got really smart, and they actually incented the energy companies in this country to invest in cybersecurity. It was brilliant. And so, but today, I would also say that we're kind of hearing the same things out of the whole IoT market and commercial real estate. It's like, hey, nothing bad has happened yet. Well, it has, but the consequence hasn't been public safety, right? And that will lead to property and casualty. And so, is something bad going to happen for everyone to really rise up and do something about this? Unfortunately, that's probably going to be the case. And you hate to see it, but that's typically what happens, because then they see where there's a hard return on investment. And so that was my backtrack to come back to your.
Well, I just want to say, just, and we all know this, right? I mean, everybody who's listening and in this industry, just because we haven't heard that something bad has happened doesn't mean that something bad hasn't happened.
That's right.
But let's be honest about it. We're all in this industry, and we all know. But I think the front page news is what people are considering the bad. But we all know that there's been business disruptions in terms of people's businesses. We don't know the details of why those business disruptions occurred, but knowing that there's a gap in this particular area, we know that it's a possibility.
Yeah. You think about just what happened recently when half the internet went down for a while. Everybody was affected. Did that cost real money? Yes, it did. So those are the kind of events that, if and when they happen, they will get some headlines. But in the meantime, these events are happening regardless. They don't make headlines. They get reported back to CISA, and that's kind of the end of it. So I think that's where we are today.
Yeah, and I know we're going to get onto the AI thing, and I'm sure everybody's interested in hearing that. But Greg, I want to ask you this regulatory thing, right? The standards. What are you hearing? What are you seeing? What's your feeling on having some rigid standards, either created by frameworks, or if they're or those frameworks being enforced or followed, but resources putting towards ensuring that there's some sort of standard in place for these IoT devices that organizations are leveraging?
Yeah, I can only speak to what I know in the in the parts of critical infrastructure, the sectors that we work in on a regular basis, and a lot of that's regulated by FERC and
Right.
through NERC-CIP, and so there's already things in place that control how IoT must be configured if it touches their business networks, if it touches their operational technology networks, which you don't have a lot of that in the operational technology networks. You don't have a lot of IoT devices. And if there are IoT devices, they're configured in such a way that they can't connect to anything.
Right.
So I don't know really how that's going to work, and especially when it comes to IoT, I don't know how that's going to work in the broader sectors.
Yeah, I would think there would be
sectors.
some sort of best practice adoption that would start to occur, or I hope that organizations are talking about best practices to adopt and maybe following similar guidelines that leaders, both privately and publicly, organizations are starting to lean in on.
Yeah, and there are things like NIST has a framework, MITRE
Right.
has a framework. We have the 62443 framework. We have even CMMC sort of applies, but there's not something specific. And so if NIST did something, that would be great. If the MITRE attack framework took this into account, that would be great. But the people that are out front, I mentioned them before, is the buildingcybersecurity.org folks. I think they've got a great solution to this. They got no skin in the game. It's a not-for-profit. It's in the best interest of building cybersecurity. That's worth taking a look at, that's for sure,
Yeah.
and making that the standard. I think that's when we get somewhere, and then we start to have some oversight that at least gives us some guidelines. It's kind of like it's like TSA gives guidelines to airports about their cyber physical infrastructure. That's fantastic. What about buildings? What about critical buildings? What are we going to do about those? So I'm not saying regulation, because I'm not really an advocate for that.
Right.
But guidelines would be great. Just give everybody some guidance on how to do this and what to do.
Yeah, because I think, as cybersecurity has evolved over, I don't know, dozen or so years, guidelines, organizations, entities have taken it upon themselves to implement these guidelines as best practices because, they've seen things happen, right? Yeah. And the hopes is at some point they will invest human and financial capital to do the same in this area. But I think both of you are probably right from the standpoint of, nothing publicly has been disclosed as being bad happening. But one, it doesn't mean that it won't or hasn't. It just means that we may not know about it. I could go down this rabbit hole for a long time. I'm pretty passionate about this, as you can tell. But we're going to get onto the AI boom that everyone's talking about. So, Randy, we'll start with you. How is AI and automation changing the way organizations protect their operational network? Obviously, everybody's wanting to use AI. Everybody's talking about using AI, but what does that look like in those operational networks, specifically as it relates to building security and things like that?
Yeah, so at a high level, obviously the bad guys are using AI and they're implementing it much, much faster than the good guys, meaning us, defending. Um, so so that's pushing the industry to do things faster and faster and provide better and better solutions. And so there's a lot of managed detection response companies out there that are doing great things with AI. And then, some of the traditional OT vendors are starting to retrofit their products with AI, which is great. In the case of what Nelisys does, it was by design from the start.
Yeah.
And the whole objective there is to put, I call it the all-inclusive approach, which is 6 tools in one. A lot of people have already bought an IDS. That's fantastic. Here's 5 other things it does, all in one tool set. And embedded in there is AI to eliminate the false positives, to make everything run faster, to be able to do real-time response. And then, and oh, by the way, and I'm sure you can definitely relate to this, having come from the Department of Energy, nobody wants any more agents on their endpoints, right? And in the case of IoT, that doesn't work. These endpoints are so small that there's not enough space for more agents, if you will. So it's got to be agentless. It's got to be deployed quickly. It's got to be real time. And then you want a solution that's going to be able to basically, not only detect it, but do something about it, right? Use microsegmentation, trap it, remediate it, and move on. Most of your infrastructure never even knew.
Yeah, and I think what's fascinating about what you talk about, and specifically Nelisys, is this single pane of glass, right? And there's a lot of disparate systems, and there's a lot of data, and there's a lot of access point, and the ability to be able to manage that from one particular platform. It impacts productivity, and with the AI capabilities, obviously, the smart system that we've heard about, right, does exist. What are you hearing, Greg, from AI and this particular topic?
Yeah, I tend to look at it more from the adversary perspective, right?
Right.
I think that it has gone in favor of the adversary at this point in terms of automation and artificial intelligence, because we talked about there hasn't been a lot of public knowledge about the adversary being able to exploit IoT devices and move laterally into other networks. But artificial intelligence and machine learning at the scale that we have now for an adversary to be able to do the research, to be able to understand what's out there, to be able to look at speeds and scale that we've never had before, to be able to look for vulnerabilities in IoT devices, to understand how those IoT devices are configured, to communicate. It's exponentially multiplied now in favor of the adversary to be able to find and exploit vulnerabilities. And so from a defender's perspective, we are definitely on our back feet.
Yeah, we're behind.
Yeah.
I think we would
definitely an advantage right now for the adversary.
I would agree with you. I think that we feel behind, right? And we're trying to figure out how to catch up. And I think you're exactly right about the adversaries are much quicker to leverage that technology than organizations are to adopt, because it's hard, right? I mean, it's hard. It's hard from the standpoint of to make those decisions, to spend money to do something when something hasn't really bad happened yet.
Yeah, if I could chime
Yeah,
in there.
go ahead.
I think there's a couple things there. One, the adversaries, they're either state funded or there's a hard ROI for them to invest, right? Because of ransomware, right? And whereas when you're on the defensive side, there's not necessarily a good hard ROI that you can go to your board and say, this is what it's going to save you. And that's why we come back to the nothing bad has ever happened. What's it going to mean to that company? So that's why, in my opinion, the adversaries are way in front of us for those two reasons, either state funded or they got a really good hard ROI.
Would you guys say that it's an easy target right now?
Yeah.
Exploiting this?
I think it's the new attack surface. This country has spent a lot of money outfitting the oil and gas industry and the rail industry and there's all the 16 critical infrastructures that CISA talks about. Most of those areas are well taken care of, but building automation systems, building management systems, data centers, not a lot of investment yet, but it's coming.
Feel that way too, Greg?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I was just trying to think of, when you think about the life cycle of, the building, construction to turning a building over to, to the person that's actually going to occupy and own the building. And there's no process. So there's no processes for checking, to where the construction company, do they have a level of responsibility for when they install all the HVAC, when they install all those IP enabled systems? Is there I go back from my Department of Defense days and I think of DISA STIGs, right? And those are very specific things that you have to do to every device before it joins a network. You have to have certain things locked down. It can't communicate to the internet, but there's, at least not that I know of, I don't think there's a standard out there for a construction company when you're putting all that stuff in place that everything, in my mind, should be locked down, completely disabled, right? But it can't be, right? Because you got to go through all the checks. You got to make sure that, HVAC relies on remote maintenance and all those things. And so again, all they're worried about is, can I deliver a building that has all the things that I said it's going to have, that it's cooling, that it's doing all these different things, has physical access. And there's just no thought of cybersecurity. And then you turn it over to the building owner or the person that's going to manage and operate that building. There's no good process most of the time for a walk down of all of the things that they put in place and all the things that are IP enabled. I've got this thing configured to communicate back to this office for remote maintenance, all that. No, it's just, there's a punch list, there's a construction punch list, right? But there's not a security punch list necessarily that the building owner goes through and checks all these things. And so it just starts out at a disadvantage.
You're talking about that, and I don't know why it just popped into my head, but I'm thinking about like athletic sports venues.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Sure.
I mean, think of all the technology that's being utilized for ticketing, scanning, security cameras, safety, access controls. And I think we're talking about ones that are built now, but what about facilities that were built long ago that are having to be updated or retrofitted? And is this even on the radar for those retrofits?
So we have had some incidents, particularly in Europe, where things have happened. And so I think that part of the industry is waking up that they really need to take a good hard look at the cyber physical systems. And so I think that is coming. I haven't seen it here in this country yet, but undoubtedly, as we build new stadiums and that kind of thing, that hopefully they'll be doing security by design up front. It's far less expensive to do it at the beginning, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I'd love to go through every type of facility because I think about industries, whether it be airports or casinos or things like that. I mean, I keep thinking I want to ask you guys because you guys are super smart in this space. I want to ask you all questions about that because I'm genuinely curious. Ready? All right, Greg, Randy, I know we talked briefly from a military aspect of where you see this going, but let me get your thoughts on where you see this evolving kind of in the civil and commercial area. So for instance, you think about hospitals and casinos, and then you think about airports and things. Where are you seeing this evolve?
Yeah, great question. In the commercial world, there's a number of different areas, what I call use cases. So casinos is definitely one. As everyone probably knows, casinos spend a lot of money protecting their infrastructure. Do they do that for the cyber physical part? I don't think so. And we've had two really high profile hacks not too long ago with MGM and Caesars. And so no doubt the bad guys are after them. Hospitals, gosh, if you shut off those camera systems and somebody walks out of you know, walks out with a baby, whew, boy, that's not good.
And connected medical devices, right?
Right, exactly. You got crazy things like pacemakers; they're all IP enabled now, right? So there's all kinds of things around the medical device and hospital systems that are definitely use cases that people should be thinking about. Another big one is we've had smart cities in this country for a number of years, and our cities are getting smarter and smarter. They're adding more devices, whether it's for traffic or buildings. There's lots of different things about cyber smart cities that involve potentially cyber. And so, have they done much about the cyber physical systems? No, they have not. But that's going to be considered here in the future, I am sure. It all comes back to the consequences, right? Are there consequences? And then, you look at the whole, what they call the CRE, which is the commercial real estate marketplace, all the tall buildings in New York and San Francisco and Chicago, all of those are pretty much wide open. And the building managers and asset owners are now finally coming around to thinking about what they need to do about cyber physical protection. So, and that's where we think Nelisys has a great play. Fast to deploy, relatively inexpensive, and it's what I call all inclusive, which I touched on earlier. So we're really excited about the marketplace. It's a big one.
I got to ask you this. I mean, when you were talking about that, medical devices thing, I just thought about the auto industry. What about think about your vehicle today and who's monitoring that. It's not just your car that's monitoring. Obviously, not Starlink, but what was it? GMC had that. OnStar, right?
OnStar, yeah.
That was kind of the first connected device that really came on the market. But if you think about camera systems and where that data goes and the data center that it's held in, and then how that's being leveraged and how those analytics are being utilized to make decisions, right?
That's right. And you could even extend that and move over to the whole electric vehicles. What about all the charging stations and how that interconnects? Imagine if all the charging stations in this country suddenly were shut off. That would be a problem.
I mean, we saw all those electric vehicles a few years ago in a winter storm in Chicago. They were just left. So
yeah, and the big ice storm in Texas, same thing. It was a mess. So yeah, there's a lot of different areas to be considered here. I think the more compelling ones really are the commercial real estate, the buildings. There will be lots of different areas that follow suit in time, because the proliferation of these IoT devices, it's not going to stop in our lifetime. I can tell you that.
Yeah, and I know your group, a lot of work you do is with critical infrastructure. So we were just talking about the ice storm in Texas, right? And you think about what that did, a weather event, but then you also think about a cyber event. Where do you see that threat landscape or technology or solving for the problem or potential problem in the next 3 to 5 years, specifically in that environment?
Yeah, I think I just have to keep going back to this idea that organizations have to understand what those high consequence events are that can impact their business. And it's from an all hazards perspective. It's cyber, it's fire, it's wind, it's ice, it's all of those things. But they got to bring all the stakeholders together and understand what those high consequence events are that are going to impact their ability to operate, or impact loss of life. In the case of hospitals, understanding that where are those devices that they have. They have to have visibility of those devices. They have to understand where they have to be able to monitor and understand when there's network traffic either coming into or leaving those networks where they have all those medical devices on. And that's where a tool like Nelisys comes into play, is to be able to have that pane of glass to better enable them to defend and make risk-informed decisions. And that's what it comes down to, is, because you can't defend everything, right? That's that old saying about if you're defending everything, you're defending nothing.
That's right.
Essentially, right? So understanding what the high consequence events are, what systems can lead to that high consequence event, and then focusing your analysis and solutions on mitigating those risks around those high consequence events.
And I think I've heard from both of you, and I really appreciate your candidness, is that these are going to be no longer optional. These are going to be essential decisions that are going to need to be made to ensure that the resiliency of organizations' infrastructure, right? And to ensure that uptime and that business can continue and safety is a priority, if I'm hearing you right.
Yep. Yeah, and I think, in summary of the whole IoT infrastructure is, in most cases, the clients, the asset owners, they don't know what they don't know. And most of them would tell you that. We got to get away from that. We got to get everybody smart, knowledgeable. They need to do assessments. They need to figure out where they're vulnerable, because right now they don't really know. They want to know, they just don't.
Well, you brought up one last point. You brought up the word assessment, and I got to ask you, the people that you're talking to, do you feel comfortable that assessments are being done efficiently and with regularity?
Yeah, the bad thing is that I think assessments are being done. The problem is that there's no penalty for not fixing stuff, right? Unless you're in a highly regulated industry, like having assets on the bulk electric system or healthcare. There are some industries or some parts of critical infrastructure that are highly regulated, and they mandate audits and assessments, and they also mandate that you prove and document where you're fixing those things and where you're mitigating those risks. So that's where assessments are effective. It's when somebody takes the assessment, they understand and they can prioritize and build a risk-based roadmap to where they're going to transition and mature their program, and then reassess next year, document, okay, yep, we fixed these things. So yeah, in those cases, it's very effective. In a lot of places that we're doing assessments, they end up they check a block because they met the compliance. Yep, it said every year we had to have an assessment done. They check that block, and then you come back the next year, do an organization, and it's kind of the same thing. You can kind of cut and paste the document that you used last year, and so it's frustrating for sure.
Yeah, I think that sums it up, right? I mean, there are people that are at varying degrees of knowledge and decisioning in this particular space, and I think everybody needs to go back and ensure that they have a good pulse on what's happening inside their organization and what's within their facilities. So,
and let me say something though, because I want to, I've met a lot of people in public power and in public utilities and things like that, and they're undermanned. Okay, so it's not meant to be a dig on the people that are trying to do this day to day.
Yeah.
So I don't want to leave this conversation with this idea that they perform assessments and they just leave them on a shelf and they don't do anything about it. A lot of that's because they're firefighters. They're playing whack-a-mole, day to day, and they're just trying to keep their head above water. So I want to make sure that I call out to the people people in public power and public utilities, things like that. They're working very hard, but a lot of times in a city there's one person trying to keep the school networks up, trying to keep the library network up, trying to manage all the street lights, trying to keep gas meters going and things like that. And they might have a 2 or 3 person team trying to help them do that. And so we definitely need help on the resource side as well.
Yeah. And I think, not to give you a shameless plug, but I guess you're going to get a shameless plug here in the aspect of, we've got to make technology work for those that are out there doing what they do, right? Yeah. And we've got to make it easier for them. And I know just what I've seen with Nellis, it's this single pane of glass and the visibility into all this. This, from a productivity standpoint, significantly helps those people that you're talking about, that you're referencing, that are out there working hard every day and trying to do the job and do the right things, but are undermanned and under-resourced. And I think that's where we've got to leverage technology. And we've got to do, the three of us, we've got to do a good job of sharing that message, sharing those capabilities, and expressing that value prop to be able to help move this forward.
Yeah. Well, and that's why we like partnering with companies like Nellis. I mean, when we go into a client, we're very selective about what vendors we partner with, and
same.
And when we can go into an organization and we can stand behind a particular product and know that it's going to help them from a people, processes, and technology perspective to help them be better at what they're doing, then that's what we want to do.
Yeah, and to Greg's point about limited resources, the next generation of technology, it's faster, better, cheaper. Yeah. That applies across the board. And that's really what we're here for.
This next question that we have kind of teed up here is, where do you see this going in the next 3 to 5 years? How will cyber physical protection evolve over the next few years? And I know we've talked about it a little bit, but do you see some defining moments or defining triggers? Or let's say we don't have any of those. Do we expect it to evolve? What's your take on that? And Greg, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I thought about this a lot ahead of time and trying to think about what I wanted to say here. And it comes down to me, I think the biggest concern in the next 3 to 5 years is the threats associated with unmanned systems and drones. I think
we haven't talked about that.
The lessons learned and and again, from an adversary perspective and from a defensive perspective, the information that's coming out of Ukraine and Russia with what they're doing with kinetic strike capabilities with unmanned aerial systems is pretty scary when we think about the next few years and the information and all of the innovation that's gone on behind that, and what they're deploying over there and how that's getting out on the dark web and on open source and sharing that information, especially when it comes to ports and our bulk electric system. How are we going to defend against kinetic UAS systems for critical infrastructure is, in my mind, the biggest consequence that we need to be ready for in the next 3 to 5 years.
That's kind of scary, right? I mean, to kind of even try to predict or understand or think of what could happen, yet we know the capability is out there, or it's being explored, or at least potentially an entry point. What are your thoughts, Randy?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the drone thing is definitely part of the whole cyber physical systems issue. Is you're trying to protect your perimeters from the bad guys, basically. And so I think, at least I can tell you, I've been really surprised at what's happened in Ukraine. And I mean, there's just these swarms of drones going everywhere, and they're dirt cheap, which is amazing considering what our military has spent on big, powerful weapon systems. And these are just wreaking havoc both ways. And so it won't be long until our adversaries are doing the same thing for our infrastructure. I mean, if you think about prisons, for example, that's happening today, right?
Yeah.
It is happening today for bad reasons. Everybody kind of knows it. You just have to watch the movies and you know exactly what happens there. But it's still the same kind of an issue. It's like, hey, they're just flying stuff over and dropping stuff in. But if you're part of the electric grid, well, all of your, particularly your nuclear sites, there's no one there physically. So everything has to be automated. You know, if you just go down the road to Calvert Cliffs nuclear plant down in Southern Maryland, there's like maybe 20 people that actually physically work there. So you got to have the rest of this automated to watch for the adversaries. So, and the drone thing is just going to make it an extra level of difficulty.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you both. I think we are not necessarily familiar with the way that this is going to be leveraged in the future. We have ideas, but you know, when you think about this digital ecosystem that has connection points to physical locations and physical apparatuses and things like that, I have to feel that this is no longer going to be an optional type decisioning point, an optional type of risk analysis. This is going to be essential as we move more into this AI and this digital ecosystem, because it's all going to be interconnected, right? I mean, everything is going fire suppression, access management, facial recognition, and to be able to secure those devices and ensure that they're not being leveraged against us is going to be essential.
And I think the only people that have actually done something and not resolved, but headed in the right direction is the U.S. military. For any new facilities that they build, which isn't a lot today, they got a bigger retrofit problem. But any new facilities, particularly stuff that's happening in the Asia Pacific area, there's a lot of construction going on over there. Cyber is built in by design, by regulation in the military. So that's a great step forward. And so they're taking that into account at the beginning. And if everybody got thinking that way, then we'd be off to a much better start.
Yeah. Final thoughts by you, Craig?
I'm glad you brought that up, because I should have said that when I talked about the building management system and the construction and the process, because Department of Defense, Department of War does have a very good process around that, and they are doing very well in that space, and there are very strict controls put in place for the construction and when they turn it over to the military installation, and there is a very strict process. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I didn't mention.
Hey, good news, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
We ended on good news.
There we go.
Well, look, I want to thank our guests from Nelisys and CI Discern, Randy and Greg. I really appreciate you joining us today and for sharing your insights on how organizations and how products are looking at this problem going forward, and for us to be able to stay one step ahead on these physical threats, and especially as this digital ecosystem is emerging. So thanks again.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it.